Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining the Lived Experience Report. My name is Sybil, and I'm the founder of Vero Learning and your host for the Leadership Series, where we speak with leaders who are operating at the edge of how work, learning, and talent are actually evolving. And so this series exists because there's a growing gap between what we measure and what actually drives performance at work. And at Vero, we focus on what doesn't show up on paper. So, how folks make decisions, how they adapt under pressure, how they follow through, and how that translates into real outcomes. And I'm really excited to be joined today by Elliott Haden from Accenture, someone who's been thinking deeply about how learning systems are evolving, especially in the context of AI. So, Elliot, thank you so much for being here and for being our first guest. We're so
Thank you for
excited.
having me. Yeah, a pleasure. Absolutely.
Of course. And so of course the goal isn't to be overly polished. It's really just understanding what's actually true right now and how your lived experience has shaped how you see all of this. And if I may be honest, I'm still trying to find the right language for some of this myself. So I may ask things a little raw. So I would love to start with you, Elliot. When did you first feel like something in the system, whether it was learning or hiring or performance, just wasn't working the way it was supposed to?
Oh gosh. You know, a little bit about my experience, right? So I've gotten into learning and development, I think in a maybe a traditional sense, right? I see a lot of people that just come up from the ranks, right? You start in sales, you talk so much, they you don't make sales happen, so they stick you in sales training, right? And then somehow you get into technology. I've got a whole career in commercial real estate that I sometimes forget about, but what led me to this route in learning and development technology was teaching sales, and sitting in a classroom all day, and then somehow learning actually how to build e-learnings and doing some coding and all that stuff. So it's funny. It's been this culmination of experience, but I have I mean, I'm sure a traditional learning expert would come in here and say, that's not how I did it. I went through a completely different route, or maybe they have an education that's a little bit more aligned to learning and development rather than me, who's, got a couple finance degrees and, use them to make really bad trades happen. Um,
I love the
you know,
careers.
yeah, it's funny how you get here, but again, I look at things a little bit differently just because of that background, right? I've got sales experience. I usually cut through the whole marketing sales pitch of some of these things. I think one of the things that everyone is used to hearing in our industry is learning in the flow of work, learning in the flow of work, right? We've been selling these learning experience platforms for, I don't know, 20 years now. And it's always some sales guy that comes up and says, learning in the flow of work. And it's like, okay, well, what the hell do you mean by that?
Yeah.
I usually go the contrarian route with it, honestly.
Wow.
It's usually not what they expect. They will sell a platform and it's learning in the flow of work, right? Honestly, if I have to jump into a new system, that's out of the flow for me. So, I think what I've noticed about the industry is it's very quick with marketing terms. They love to be flashy and use these different terms to sell this experience that they have, but sometimes the experience is just it bound by technology, bound by what we have going on, right? A lot of
Right.
the things that we use today, that are really coming to the forefront are only because AI has just made it cheaper to produce. I'll give you a good example in learning development. You barely have a budget to spend on building the content, right? It's
Yes.
mostly very expensive to build.
Right.
That's been the race to the bottom for the last, 2 years. AI has quickly turned that into the solar panel industry, right? If we can get this as cheap as possible, we'll put them on every roof, right? That's what I see right now as being this big thing is that it is a race to the bottom. And again, learning and development usually doesn't take pages out of other people's textbooks, but that to me has been the biggest, spot that I've noticed. It is this race to the bottom. And again, that has a lot of implications for our industry, honestly, the learning and the flow piece, right?
Right.
now with AI, you're starting to get there, right? I would say the only thing that's learning in the flow is, when you get triggered by like a security email or something that's trying to catch you catch you in a phishing email, right? You're like, okay, I'm in the flow, and I'm getting hammered by this phishing email scam thing, and I've got to pass that, or if I don't, they're going to send me through learning again. That's probably the holy grail of learning content, right? Is where you can actually test somebody when they're, actually in a lived experience of being in work. A lot of learning programs don't have that ability. They have to build mock simulations, or something that gets you out of what you're doing on a daily basis, or your regular work schedule, just to go and say, oh, you hit this metric. Yeah, we know Elliott's learned security, and how to attract a phishing email. I mean, that those programs, they drop it right into your inbox, right? There's no avoiding it.
Right.
Yeah.
So we have the infrastructure to do it, but it sounds like we might not be, measuring the right thing. And the big thing I think that stood out to me about what you said is like that the race to the bottom. And I think it's a little bit ironic that like learning departments are not open to getting feedback from others. I mean, because learning is just the most complex industry that's out there. We have a hiring tool and a recruiting tool, and an education development tool. And our education development tool is like 3x times harder because you have to look at so many different stakeholders, so many different variables. And it's not just identifying talent, but it's also being able to develop it over time. And as you've said, like you need to have better touch points of truly engaging with learning. And so like why do you think that might be? Like why are like learning the folks that are tasked to really help us all learn better? Why do you think they might not be open to that feedback? And like what do you think would be like what's the most detrimental outcome of that, especially now that we have AI that's like accelerating the pace of everything essentially?
Yeah. I'm not sure if they're adverse to the change or anything, but I'm sure
Mhm.
that there's a lot of people that are in this space that have been doing it for a number of years, and they recognize that it's just, think about sales training for a second. I did sales training for years, and I hardly think that anybody sat there and said, "Damn it, I made great sales happen because Elliot." Most salespeople are going to sit there and they're going to be like, "No, that's all me. Elliot taught me a few things, but." They're not going to give credit where credit is due on a lot of that stuff. And where I'm going with this is that it's just been very fluffy to measure direct outputs from learning, right? That's been the biggest issue, and it's expensive on top of that, right? You've got to pull somebody out of what they're doing to go and measure ROI on a learning thing. Like I said, you barely have the budget to create the learning in the first place. They're not going to probably support the fact that you want to, tell the story. So we get very basic metrics sometimes. You've completed this, you've done this. Usually at this point, when I talk to clients, I try to tell them that, they're in a world now where they should consider all data learning data. And
Right.
again, to use another silly example, it's the old Arm& and Hammer baking soda technique, right? How do we sell more baking soda? Well, we invent new uses for it, right? That's a lot of what we have to do in learning. We're inventing new ways to measure things, and that's usually the catalyst of AI, of just making it cheaper. Now, a great example is XAPI. And shout out to our great friends, not Udacity. Oh gosh, I'm going to blank out on their name at this point. Well, the ones who basically run the XAPI. XAPI has been around for years, right?
It's
Rusticy.
your audience
Shouts
just
out to the Rusticy folks.
Ross.
Um,
Okay.
we've had XAPIs since, I don't know, 2014, 2015. Why
Hmm.
are we not using it? Well, it's because first off, it's too expensive. You know,
Hmm.
Before the learning teams, they only had instructional designers that, you'd be lucky to find an instructional designer that knows JavaScript, or JSON, or any of these coding applications that would be required to utilize some of that high-end data fidelity. Now, again, it's become cheaper. I can use natural English, and I can go in and say, add this code to my module, to my learning, and track the time that Elliot's on this. If you notice that Elliot's on this slide for 20 minutes, ping him and ask him if he needs help. That's where I've seen a big change in how we're doing development of learning content. And again, the catalyst has become the race to the bottom, right? I can do this cheaper and faster. It speeds quality up.
Right.
Now I'm enriching my content with new data things that I want to track. Now that's not saying that, it's really just giving you more work to do. More data does not equal success. You have to then figure out a way to read that data. Yeah,
Frame.
yeah. Which then you use AI again. You say, okay, now that I've produced twice as much data, hey AI agent, what does it tell me? Tell me the ROI. What's going on? So this is what we're seeing is we're seeing this loop continue where they're using AI to bring down the cost of measuring themselves and measuring these things, but putting the measurements even in place using AI. Instructional designers are probably going to have to change overnight to data developers, and again, there's a lot of people that are going to have this role, but most of my clients at this point, we were talking to a client even today, and I told them, if you can push the creation down to the local levels who have the knowledge, right, then you're
Right.
great. It's Wikipedia.
Raw.
Wikipedia has set up a platform that if you hold the knowledge, you do
Mhm.
not need to talk to an instructional designer or a third party to say, "Can you write this up for me? Can you
Exactly.
ghost write this article for me?" You just go in there
Right.
and add it in, right?
Yes.
That's the big change. The centralized learning teams of the past that used to sit there and do the consulting and take 17 million years to build a learning and make it expensive, it's going to go away. Now we're being asked to create tools at a local level.
Right.
Give my subject matter experts the ability to create multimodal learning. And we're the quality control on that is certainly you know to be decided, right? I'm sure you've got great examples and bad examples, but that's what's really happening. And give it, nod your hat to LXPs, right? LXPs were the first thing to say, "Whoa, you've got this walled garden of a centralized LMS. Everyone hates eating in this giant kitchen of an LMS, and we're going to put this nice dining room on it, right? And call it an LXP. So, go do your learning at the dining room and leave the admins in the kitchen of the LMS, right?
Right.
That's where it all kind of started. And now we're just seeing it completely snowball. And now they're pushing even more control to the local business, right? Doesn't take a manager 3 weeks and 17 tickets to figure out what their team is learning.
Right.
Usually those metrics are now at your fingertips, right?
Correct.
Um, and so that work has been something that I've noticed has been happening for a while, but again, with AI, it has only increased this push. Oh, everyone's federalized learning this. Okay, great. It really boils down to how do I push the tools to the people that need it the fastest, right?
Right.
You can manage the data standard at a central level, right? If I'm a CLO, I have now just become the Bureau of Labor Statistics. I want I want to manage the data. I want to know what's going on with the data. I want to build the data standard for what we track. I don't care if you consume that learning, that book on a picnic blanket at home, in bed. I don't care.
We won't
I
be
don't
able to
I
put that
don't
in.
care. Yeah.
Right.
Salespeople like to learn off a phone. People that
Mm.
are in tech like to learn off glowing rectangles. Some people just like to learn hands-on. I don't care
It's
where the learning experience is.
we want to have one centralized place to track it and see what happens over time.
Exactly.
What I mean, there's so many good nuggets from what you've said. I mean, I don't even know where to start, but I think the big one is that all data is learning data, and that instructional designers are going to need to become data developers. And it's so cool and interesting you said that, because I spent the last 72 hours plus building out an app that combines our our jumpstart tutoring service, the human capabilities of hiring people that are going in the schools meeting with kids, with the data analytics framework of our 12 human capabilities. And I use Lovable to do it. Like, I don't code. I do focus a lot on system architecture, and I already had our frameworks, and so it was easy to go ahead and plug it in. And so now we've got like our lived experience score, which is like tested and true, but then we have this new like we're calling it like in the moment actions, like did our tutor check in and check out on time? How
Mhm.
consistently are they using suggested, materials like our decision bot or reflection journals? And it's just essentially tracking over time whether our tests and their actions are, matching. And so it's I'm literally doing what you're saying in real time. So it's not even just, I think, folks that are directly like in education, but even like business owners or really anyone that wants to optimize results. Like you said, sales folks need to start thinking about ways that they can use tools. So have you ever used Lovable? Like, because it literally, I think it gives an opportunity to do this that wasn't available before unless you were a data developer or
Oh yeah,
coder.
yeah, Lovable. I've used Lovable before. I've gotten into some of the UI tools on that. I know how to code a little bit, but I would call it the great equalizer, right? And again, it's probably scary for some, but for others who have got the creativity on their side, it can do some really fascinating things. What this really means is smaller teams, smaller companies, more getting done locally. We haven't really hit that method yet. You see some of the rumblings with people being laid off from their jobs for some of these, but I expect that to really kind of come down the pipeline. Eventually, it's just naturally going to happen that you have smaller teams with smaller company sizes because more can get done, and you don't need the overhead that you used to have. I think there was a big article this week on not Salesforce, Oracle, right? Oracle laid off a bunch of people in their security world because they've automated a lot of that at this point. So I think if we can not go into civil war from the massive amount of job loss that are going to happen, this is actually a creative thing that could really help us all out. But hopefully people will build their own business. To your point, you're an entrepreneur. You've got several businesses. This is a great time for you to not need the overhead, right? Again, it's the race to the bottom. I think there was another article the other day about the first billion-dollar company that was vibe coded and it cost the guy $20,000. That's the future. You're going to have a lot more companies like that get created because they have that founder's mentality. They're not waiting on anybody to go out there and they don't need a team of developers in India to do things for them. They do it themselves at this point. So, the internet was like this in the beginning, right? I usually always look for people for my team that have been able to teach themselves an autodidact through the internet. I learned how to rebuild car engines from the age of 16 by going on Google and doing nothing but forum searches, right? Um, yeah, those are the people from the early internet days that have taken it and used it in that way. And you can imagine if you've already done that with a search system, what are you doing in the prompt system, right? I mean, I'm constantly learning something, and hey, Chat GPT, explain this like I'm drooling out of one side of my mouth because I don't know what you're talking about, right? That's a great way to
Yes,
go in there and to make it adaptable to your needs, right?
exactly.
Um, it's going to be a funny world. I mean, again, like if I go back and forth on this whole doomsday scenario of like, if we can keep from the fabric of our society here from eroding because there's just too much of us that don't have
Yeah.
purpose.
Mm,
I think this is a real boon for it.
mm.
I've got, we're both in LA. We've
Yeah.
seen Hollywood is shook, you know,
Oh man, they are.
absolutely shook.
Ah,
Um, you know,
yes,
as they should be.
they
If
should.
I was in that world, I would be shook too. I would be learning to code. I would be doing other things. I would be expanding my horizons immediately,
Correct.
embracing it rather than rejecting it. But, you know,
Well,
it's Mhm.
I first off, like your experience of like going through forums and actually building like a car engine, like whoa, like talk about lived experience on 1000. Like that's literally what Vero's about. It's capturing those kind of signals. That says so much about who you are that a certification, or a degree doesn't. And, what we're of the belief of is that, like, as AI is automating tasks, things like static skills, certificates, degrees, they're actually losing their predictive value. These are signals that are decaying. And the things that you've mentioned, like your lived experience, your adaptability, your decision quality, are actually the things that are the most valuable and predict the most success, because they're the things that AI cannot readily do. And so, when you look at people that are, perform at a high level, or even yourself, like with the example you just gave of like having, taking the initiative essentially to you look at the forums and to build something. Like, what do you consistently see that those folks do differently, that we're just not measuring right now?
There's a lot that isn't measured. The learning industry has been trying to measure the whole 360, right? They always talk about formal and informal and in the flow. Okay, great. We've got completion data, but now that I tell you, all data is learning data, the in the
Right.
flow stuff is stuff in your CRM. How many meetings is Elliot set? What clients is Elliot talking to? Did he take a training before that? Did he take it afterwards, right? Now, we could have all that data today, and the other problem just becomes shit. Now I've got to read all that data and get an output, and that's expensive. I got to find somebody that knows what to do and read that data. That's where AI is really, the ability for it to process that information and produce an output is what really the value is. The automation, this agentic thing that people keep talking about, I'm sure every statistician out there is like, okay, this is just RPA. It's just the same thing we've been doing where we say, when this thing happens, trigger this outcome. So that's always been something that they've tried to set up, right? They always do these robotic process automations that, it's still there. The only thing that speeds it up is that you don't need a human to read anything anymore. You just
Correct.
have an AI read it and produce the results. Hey, AI, take all this data and tell me what it says, you
Right.
know? And then,
Exactly.
do interpretive dance with it so I know, what it's telling me.
Right.
Um, that's been the real boon. And again, even to the example of, me learning off the internet. That's a whole data stream that most folks don't tap into. They have no idea, what's Elliot curious about? What's going on? I built a couple, you were talking about Lovable. I built a few applications the other day that were just plugins for your browser that tracked, all the YouTube history that you were watching. And it ran it to an LLM and it said, well, what skills is Elliot, focused on here, That's data we never had before. Um, that's kind of the process that I think that is happening. And, people are going to be like, oh my God, data, 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 you're going to know everything about me, which I'd probably argue that they already do in a lot of regards.
They do.
But it's going to get worse. I'm sure that at this point, it's just going to be more data processing, and this is the big thing for learning, right? They're going to have to be data stewards. They're going to have to release this whole thing of, hey, we're going to build the learning for you, and it's going to cost $50,000 for you to build it. That's not the reality anymore. The reality is, if you're a mechanic, here's some tools that you can build your learning, and when you do build it, here's some more tools to enrich it with the data APIs that you want, right? I think that's a big wake up moment for the learning industry is the fact that we all are going to be coders. And that really is just English, right? It's
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
text to code.
So many
And
people talk AI literacy, but what you just said, I think, is like huge, right? Because I push back, because it's not just like knowing how to like log into ChatGPT and ask questions, but it's really being able to build like those human capabilities. Like all the things you mentioned were about judgment, adaptability, taking ownership, right? It's really like human capabilities are what allow us to figure out what skills to use at what instance, at what time, right? And even though we're automating tasks, like we're not able to automate that. Like that is like a purely human thing. And so I just wanted to like like really focus in on that because I think that's the highest use of AI. Like you have kids going to schools, they're cheating on this test, they're cheating on their homework, they're taking a picture literally of their math problems and they're asking ChatGPT to answer it and they're turning it in. They can ask ChatGPT to show work, right? And so I think what you're talking about is a reckoning, and it's a reckoning that the entire education system is going to have to face. Like we have to focus on building capabilities and not just skills. And so the example you gave of YouTube and like being able to track like what skills you were building over time based on what you were watching, like that's fascinating. And I totally agree with you. Like the one thing I think that like we're trying to become, and that I think you've mentioned is like it is like a workforce API. Like we don't really have one, right? Like something that travels from like education to government to workforce to getting a job to keeping you on that job to like what happens next. And it's like, as AI is just shifting the skill sets that are human now, it seems like that's probably going to be more important to measure than maybe just the static skills alone. And so with that, I wanted to kind of wrap this up and ask you this because this is really in your domain, and something I think our audience is thinking about every day. Like as AI takes over more tasks, what becomes more important in humans, that we're still undervaluing?
Oh, that's a good one. And a heavy one for the last one. I would say that if you don't have a founder's mentality, you're probably not going to survive. If you don't understand how to go out and build product, if you don't know how to talk to people, you're probably not going to be able to get some of these more traditional jobs, right? It's going to be, again, smaller companies, smaller teams, more localized experiences. We may not even trust anything on the internet in the next 6 months. I already today have a hard time seeing photos and videos and understanding if they're real. So, we may run up against the fact that we don't trust the internet anymore. And so this is going to force us into local communities, into local experiences. It's only going to speed up that um, smaller team, smaller company problem. And that's something that we're going to have to reckon with here in a few months, probably. I mean, the time horizon on this is very short, but I see AI being a blessing and certainly a curse to some, right? If you are a fat cat who has gotten high in their career, you are at a detriment to what people are doing now, right? It's just inevitable that the young ones that are coming up, even me, I can't get ahead of it. I would be there's no way you can understand all of the different AI tools that are coming out. You mentioned Lovable, but there's it's a dime a dozen these days, a dime
Oh,
a dozen,
oh
and
yeah.
they're constantly being created. And I think it's going to just make this experience, or at least have this effect where everyone thinks that they are in a founder's mentality, hopefully. And again, I'm totally for it. I'm very founder mentality. Um, I think that other people are not, right? That's what I'm worried about. I'm worried about the people that just want a job. If you just want a job, then you are going to be tasked away. If you, and again, there's nothing wrong with those types of folks at all. There are people that love their families and want to go out there and support their families and just want a 9 to 5. That's the world that's going to change very rapidly. You
Right.
know, and those are the people that unfortunately probably make up the majority of the workforce. And so if we don't give them some type of income, they're gonna be rioting in the streets because their jobs are going to be absolutely cut.
Right.
Um,
Right.
I think that's the big overarching issue that a lot of these tech guys feel, especially the CEOs and CIOs. It's like, well, I don't need that workforce anymore. I don't need to hire somebody just to sit at a desk and do nothing or maybe a few tasks a week. That could be automated and it will be automated. What is that person going to do? Well, if they don't start their own business, then I don't know.
Well, it's daunting, but I hear you. I think we have to do something really fast, to think about like what what it means to be a human at work, where our value lies, and I'm one of those who believes that there's going to be a tough transition if people don't like start taking action yesterday, and we're already in today. But I'm also one of those who thinks that we absolutely will find like new use cases and experiences for humans to partake in. It's just, do we have a system where that transition is going to be, a good one? Because we can't afford to just lose a generation of people off of this, right? Like that's just not fair. That, oh, we sorry, you were born between X years, we just didn't have time to figure it out, So I'm totally with you there, and I think that folks that are also on the policy side should be listening to practitioners like you, because this is definitely the reality that we're all going to have to live through no matter what. And so I lied. I said, this is my first time, so I might not be polished. I do have one actual last
Yeah, go for it.
question. And so, at Vero, we measure lived experiences and those capabilities that don't often come up in a resume. Since this is our first one, like for me, it was seeing a 6-year-old boy chasing after my dad's car in Haiti, that desire to survive. And, my heartbreaking realizing that we live in a world where you could literally just be starting your life and not have any shot of making it, and then getting older and seeing those same kids fix cell phones and laptops that technicians at top Apple stores, in New York couldn't fix. And so I think there are a lot of hidden capabilities that you can't automate away and that like we're just not seeing yet. And that really is the inspiration for Vero, was constantly seeing people, including myself, be overlooked by these traditional metrics. And now, they're experiencing signal decay. People have a job for 2 years, they're not doing the same thing they were doing. Even last quarter, they're not using the same tools they were. So I think this is a reckoning and a real opportunity to be an equalizer, and for us to really find out, ironically, like, what it means to be a human being, as AI is taking away all of the actual non-human jobs. And so with that, and thinking in the context of lived experience and human capabilities, if you were to be rebuilding, how we evaluate talent, what would you measure first?
Curiosity, immediately
Mm,
curiosity. If you can measure curiosity, I think that you can have a phenomenal amount of opportunity with somebody. If again, look at my lived experience, right? No company wants me to talk about the fact that I learned how to build car engines off of reading forums. I've had the same car my entire adult life because I've kept this thing alive, right? She wants to be put to pasture, I won't let her. And to your point, it's a data piece that has not produced much value because people don't know how to understand that value. But the curiosity, the empowerment that it brought, I take this to every job. I'm constantly learning something. I'm constantly that same 16-year-old kid that has a need, can't afford to go out and find somebody to do it. So I have
right,
to learn it,
right,
you know? You
right.
have those types of people, and then you have again the people that are, I just want a job, I just want to be told what to do.
Yeah,
And it's like,
yeah,
well, you're going to find yourself at and they make, there's a lot of people like this in sales. They do one thing, the derogatory term is you're a used car salesman, right? Here's a PowerPoint and go sell it, you know?
yeah,
Those worlds aren't going to be around anymore. I have a feeling that it's going to be a measurement of how curious have you been, what have you been up to on the side. Formal learning, going to college, you don't even need it. College education, there's probably top 10% of people that should be going to school, and the whole 90% of us that went, me included, it was a waste. It's a rat race to go through school. It's nothing more than just getting a job, right? Oh, you can do 4 years of school, you can get this job. When I went to my first job at CoStar there in DC, they did not care about my college education other than the fact that it just showed that I would do something for 4 years. You
right.
know, they taught me everything I needed to know there. That's usually how it goes when you first come out of those worlds. Think about it now, right? You're not going to need 60,000 kids coming out of a marketing program anymore. It's just a complete change of what we were sold before. And everyone's like, well, I hate to hear people that talk about, well, that person doesn't have a college education. You can learn everything off the internet. The internet is the greatest learning tool we've
Oh,
ever had. And I've
oh yeah.
learned more from the internet than any professor has ever provided me, you
Oh
know?
yeah.
And,
Yeah.
I'm not going to sit there and hold a candle to the 10% that get into Oxford, but, somebody who's, generally a B student, I think that this is really a wake-up moment, you know?
I
How do you track curiosity? How do you
mhm,
show that somebody is curious to learn on their own, take the initiative? And
right.
again, those are the skills that, usually you don't even see now in LMSs. Oh, you know how to Python code, you know how to do this and that. It's never to your point, the lived experience of, is Elliot a follower or is he a leader? Is he going to do this himself or do I have to hold his hand? You know? Um,
It's meant
Nobody
for
was going to fix my car for me. I
no.
couldn't afford a mechanic at 16 years old, so it was me. Do you have the drive to learn on your own? I think those are going to be the most important skills that we measure in the future. Difficult to measure, certainly fluffy. Hopefully AI gets us there, right? A little bit more every day. But I think that's my main point. It's being curious.
I am with you on that. I couldn't agree with you more. And I think with Vero, we try to make it not fluffy, right? We've got this taxonomy. We looked at 100,000 performance outcomes, and we find that 97% of performance outcomes are here, in this taxonomy. And so I think that AI makes things that we used to think fluffy, measurable, and it's just a matter of, are you going to go out there? And I find it so funny what you mentioned about, like the few of us who go to Oxford. I graduated from Cambridge, admittingly, and I still agree with you. Like, that is not the coolest thing about me. The coolest thing about me is how a single, parent kid who has a Haitian immigrant mom with, no money, like got into Cambridge without private tutoring and then started a business with $500 and then turned it into an AI company, right? Like, it's all the things you said, the learning agility, the drive, initiative, and being able to build those skills under pressure in real life. And so, like, I'm going to send it to you if you're interested, our lived experience assessment. What I think is cool about it is it doesn't ask you one question about what you know. It's all scenario based, it's all industry based, it's all role based, and it's all about how you would act in real life under pressure. And so you can't game it. And so, we don't have all the answers, but we do have the framework. And so we're just excited to just keep talking with smart people like you, so that, together we can figure this out. And so I just think, Elliot, this was just incredibly thoughtful. I appreciate how honest you've been. Thank you again for being my first guest, for bearing with me. I think this was such a strong way to begin the series. Like, you've really set the bar really high, and so just thank you so much for this time.
Well, yeah, thank you for having me and excited to take the test and to see more from Vero. And yeah, it's been a pleasure. So let me know if you've got any more questions. I certainly will. I'm a sales trainer. We talked to her blue in the face, right? So
We're all
uh,
learned so much from you today. Yeah, we did. I'm sure, myself and the audience included. So thanks for being on board.
absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thanks. Bye.